By now, the cloud is real in the enterprise enough that we're starting to have some pushback and some sort of sanity checks on some aspects of it. One of the aspects that I know that people are really interested in is data sovereignty. In other words, where is my data? Who owns my data? What kind of control is there over it? So that's what I wanted to talk about with Nathan Bennet here. We are at Cloud Field Day here in beautiful Silicon Valley, and we're kind of catching up on all things cloud. Nathan, tell us a little bit more about yourself and introduce the topic.
Yeah, so I've been in the cloud space for a number of years at this point, and the idea of sovereignty within the clouds is a pretty big topic nowadays, especially within specific areas within the public sector and other areas for compliances and security reasons. Within the sovereign cloud that we're talking about, it's really about, to your point, where is my data? But most importantly, like who has possible access or access adjacent to the data. For instance, multi-tenancy is a much bigger issue than, say, just a normal customer that it wants to just log in and utilize the cloud.
And I think that when people hear the term data sovereignty, I think they immediately jump to basically European countries wanting data to stay in Europe, or, I don't know, the US wanting data to stay out of China, the kind of things that you hear about in the news. But I think that it's a lot more than that, right?
Yeah, so there's geo-proximity is definitely like the first step. Like if you are an entity within the US government or the EU, you want to make sure that the data is actually stationed within those sovereignties. So that's where we kind of have the first initial idea of a sovereign cloud, is that it's within that particular region or area. But the next step is then who has access to it, and is it the people that are running the cloud, and then that leads to, well, who do we have access that may have access to it? And it's this sort of kind of rock skipping on the top of the lake, where it's not necessarily about the lake, but about the rock skipping and verifying all of the different security aspects of that rock, where it's skipping, and then securing those skips.
Yeah, and so it is a lot more than ownership. But as you bring up, multi-tenancy, I think, is one of the key considerations. One of the things about the cloud business model that makes it actually work is multi-tenancy. So you have these hyperscalers that have these massively multi-tenant clouds. You're running applications in Amazon AWS. How many other people are running in AWS East 1? Well, a lot.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that some people have some concerns about, right? Because they're worried about sort of cross-contamination. They're worried about access control. And also there have been all sorts of security breaches involving, basically breaking the walls of multi-tenancy over the years, or at least purported security breaches involving that. How real is this concern? I mean, should people be worried about it?
So should a small and medium business be concerned about it? I would say no. If you are concerned a bit, there are multiple different services that are already prevalent within the clouds to allow you for resiliency and durability of your data to maintain that security. But what we're talking about is something that's very specific to a very specific group of customers that are looking to maintain security at an extremely high level. If you're in the public sector, you have an idea of FedRAMP compliance and impact level compliance, or what we commonly refer to as IL4, IL5, IL6. These all have specific criteria that need to be met, and met for a number of times, in order to maintain that criteria. And if they fall under it, then it drops away. And so when we've discussed, and you discussed, the hypervisors like AWS and GCP and Azure, Microsoft and Alibaba, all of these have specific criteria for their secure sovereign clouds, which are kind of set apart from the normal commercial clouds that we think of. But then we see additional players in the game that are just popping up and utilizing co-locations to create sovereign clouds specifically for customers. And then the next step on top of that is we see individual agencies building sovereign clouds that they can themselves use specific to their use cases. So the idea, it's changing the definition of what we think of in terms of cloud, from the idea of a public architecture, multi-tenancy, to something that's set apart from multi-tenancy, but still for a specific subset of users, to something almost what we would think of as like a private data center.
but yet still embodying some of the other aspects of the cloud in terms of API driven and as a service, and be able to be like reconfigured dynamically, and the sort of things that people love about the cloud, but yet addressing these concerns.
That's right. It has to be, all clouds have to have three main criteria, and that has to be software defined, compute, network, and storage. And what that means, and your point of it being API driven, if I hit an API and it goes to basically no man's land where it has to then create a ticket for some guy to go and build something, that's not a cloud that we would kind of want to use, where you need specific automation behind it and orchestration in order for us to say, hey, I need an instance, and then we get an instance within a set amount of time based off of SLAs.
Is it mostly a question for governments, or is this relevant for enterprise and businesses as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's relative to specific enterprise customers, is what I would say, because there are use cases where certain set of compliances have to be met. And I'm not talking about like healthcare where there's like HIPAA and some of those areas, although those are very, critical criteria that must be met. I'm talking about something that's more like we have this subset within kind of an offshoot, like specifically to SIs or system integrators within the government. So your Lockheed Martins and other groups like that. Those are the people that are kind of outside of the actual government that do work for the government, and so they have access to these sovereign clouds in order to build these things. And to the other side of it is there are specific sovereign clouds that the average customer just won't have access to. It's built specifically for a group of customers within the public sector or within a specific criteria, so they don't have access to it, and they would have to go and build their own sovereign clouds, which is where that third sovereign cloud start popping up.
So what do you see coming in the future? Do you think that this is going to become more important? Do you think there's going to be stricter rules? Do you think that some technology change? What are we looking for in the future?
I mean, it could be any one of those. I think right now there needs to be a little bit better criteria-driven understanding of what should be kept into these specific areas. I think within the hardware, to your point, there are specific hardware capabilities coming down the pipe that might actually change the way that we view that tenancy issue that we were discussing in terms of multi-tenancy. But the main thing that I've been just enjoying is how all of this kind of changes how we view the term cloud from the major hyperscalers into basically how we consume our compute, network, and storage, who has control of the data, who has access to the data, and that automation and orchestration. It just changes it into an operating model, right? And that operating model can work for an SMB, but it can also work for the DoD, who has to maintain that insane compliance level that they have to maintain.
Yeah. Well, it is a really interesting world, because I think that a lot of people listening may not have a lot of experience with government, military, international, and to them, I think this might be a bit of an eye opener to realize that these are the kind of concerns that people are dealing with. So I really appreciate that kind of background. If you're interested in this, where can people find you and talk to you about it some more?
Yeah, so I write for a blog on sterling.com/blogs. I write for my own blog personally at nerdynate.life. And if you have any questions or want to hit me up, you can always find me on, do we still say Twitter? Do we say X?
I say X Twitter.
X Twitter. You can find me as Nathan Bennet there, and hit me up with any questions there as well.
And you'll find me at S. Foskett on most social media networks, and of course on the Gestalt IT Rundown every Wednesday, and the On-Premise IT Podcast every Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and tune in for the Cloud Field Day videos. You'll find them at techfieldday.com and also on YouTube at just YouTube/techfieldday.